If you want to piss off a Sapphic fandom, it's not very hard, because Sapphic fandom has one thing in particular that gets us particularly riled up. A quick jaunt down the annals of Sapphic film and TV history will reveal a particularly pernicious and persistent issue that the mainstream media just love to do with our representation. They love to kill us, especially if it's brutal, preemptive, and unnecessary. The more violent and unnecessary, the better. Bonus points if you leave behind a grieving lover, sobbing as she literally feels the soul of her love depart this world, just to shove that dagger in a little deeper and then twist it a little harder. Makes for some really great, dramatic, epic television that just has you coming back for more. Am I right? That is what Season 3 of The Wheel of Time just gave us. Thanks for the turd sandwich. Also, why? Well, I'll reveal the thinking behind this decision, as well as how this did not have to happen. To be clear, I'm not saying that Saphics should never be killed, or that Siuan shouldn't have been either. As we'll explore, tragedy is part of the DNA of the Moiraine and Siuan relationship, but it was implied by showrunner Rafe Judkins that would be treated with more care, and quite frankly, I thought they'd get more time. There is a certain sting knowing that he is a gay man who knows what killing a Sapphic character means, and the historical context of doing it, but still decided to do it anyway. So, out the window goes all my notes about this season, about how I thought it had gelled better than any season before it, about how I was finally getting into most of the storylines and getting invested, how the central characters were taking shape and their arcs were starting to get interesting. I was going to talk about how the multitude of threads were weaving together to form an intricate and vast story, even if there were still too many characters and each episode was shoved far too full with, at times, wonky pacing. I was also going to delight in how this was the gayest season yet, with the casual inclusion of a number of delightful moments that felt good, like a little nod and a wink to say that this world here is diverse and inclusive. We got you. It was great. Until it really wasn't. Killing a Sapphic character is not a neutral thing to do in media. It comes with some serious baggage that is weighed down by puritanical religious ideology that dates back to early film censorship about how being queer is abhorrent and should not be seen. And if it is, it should be framed as a really bad thing that will lead to usually death, preferably, madness or punishment. If you've even so much as glanced over a history of queer representation in film and TV, you will be aware of the 1932 agreement called the Hays Code made by Hollywood to self-censor itself when it came to depictions of certain things on our screens. It was voluntarily done because the Catholic Church had taken exception to some shocking scenes used to entice viewers to the movie theatres, and they felt that it was corrupting people's minds. With the Catholic Church telling its considerable congregation to perform boycotts, Hollywood decided it was better to get ahead of the issue rather than waiting for a regulatory government body to get control of what got made. It didn't just target the homosexuals, it was also racist, with more than a whiff of misogyny and white supremacy, and led to some frankly bizarre workarounds, like how it was required that a scene with a married couple sleep in separate beds, or if they slept in a double bed, one of them had to have their foot on the floor at all times during the scene, lest our pure minds be sullied by the idea of two consenting adults having sex. With the Hays Code banning what is called depictions of depravity, the budding representation of queer people was pushed way underground and survived only if the person was punished for being so horrifically abnormal, as I said, usually with death or madness. Much has been said on the queer coding of villains and how it's permeated such wholesome entertainment like Disney animated movies. Even after the Hays Code ended in 1968, the effects of this code was felt, and it's been over 50 years to, well, I was going to say shake the shackles off, but here we are again with more dead lesbians, so I guess that's not accurate. We've had to inch our way forward to getting mainstream representation that isn't harmful, and let's be clear that how minorities are depicted can be very harmful if done badly. I'm reminded of a comment I once received on a video where I reviewed the rom-com Kissing Jessica Stein, a film that is, in all ways but one, great and seemed to be telling a beautiful coming-out story, but at the end of the movie betrayed the audience by having Jessica break off her relationship with her girlfriend because, she's not actually gay. She then falls into the arms of a guy. Let me read you a few excerpts from the comment that was left. Words cannot explain how much I hate this film. Words cannot describe the anger, the sadness, and the rage I felt when I first saw it. As a young gay just coming to terms with my feelings, I didn't have many films telling my story. I felt alone, more alone than I'd felt even prior to coming out. This movie, which had built up such hope within me, sent it crashing down with the heteronormativity is inevitable message. All it did was make me want to shove my feelings back into my body. There isn't a single film or piece of media around that time of my life that was more potentially damaging to my journey than this film because of where I was at emotionally and in terms of vulnerability. I'm sure there are people who feel very similar sentiments about the most famous example of killing off a Sapphic character in recent times with Lexa in the CW show The 100 in 2016. It had its young, impressionable audience getting to see the lead character fall for a woman, have them consummate their relationship, only to have Lexa killed off by a stray bullet right after, so essentially in the worst way possible. The effects can't be understated. The Trevor Project, a website that offered crisis support for LGBTQ+ youth, was getting heavy promotion by the fandom because of the impact this death had had on some of the more vulnerable fans. It also ignited a groundswell of protest saying enough with the killing of Sapphic characters, since that year was an absolute bloodbath, and it got mainstream coverage. It also led to a significant decline in Sapphic characters getting killed off thanks to that outcry, and in theory, people in the industry became just a little bit more aware of this tendency to take queer women and kill them all the time in mainstream media when they even got representation at all. So like I said, killing a Sapphic is not a neutral thing to do. In 2021, when this big budget mainstream adaptation of The Wheel of Time came out and included an older, powerful leading Sapphic lady in Moiraine Damodred and a loving relationship with Siuan Sache, the most powerful person in the world, it was noteworthy because it was, as far as I'm aware, the first time that a big budget fantasy series had a leading and explicitly Sapphic lady. Don't come for me about Xena, she wasn't allowed to be officially out. So this representation holds significance. Something that Rafe Judkins seemed to understand. In an interview with Nerdist, he said, "As a gay person reading these books in the 90s and 2000s, to see Moiraine being represented as having a relationship with another woman in New Spring was such a huge moment for me. And even still today, to have a queer person as a lead in a fantasy series feels almost shocking." In an interview with the website In Their Own League, he said the following of Moiraine and Siuan's relationship. "It was one of my parts of my initial pitch for the show that this relationship would be one of the central pillars that we would see the world through. In large part, that's because Siuan is a central relationship in many ways for Moiraine's life. Their relationship is essential in the book. I think that seeing that relationship brought to life is so central and so important to this huge fantasy series." Is it really important, Rafe, if you just destroyed one of your central pillars? Him talking about how important this relationship was to him, saying it's one of the central pillars and pitching the show, that this relationship is essential, it sure seemed to be saying something. Something along the lines of, this relationship and these characters are in good hands. And season 3 seemed to be doing so well, especially in the gay way. Indeed, as I mentioned just before, the season was so delightfully and casually gay. Rafe had talked about how he intended to expand the LGBTQ+ relationships at a con in 2022, and well, he delivered on that. We see the major characters of Elaine and Avienda sleep together, something that had enough significance that we see Elaine dreaming of a life with her lover living on the high seas. We get to see more of the Aiel who, in addition to having some impressive women warriors, also seem to have a society that is very okay with polyamory and same-sex relationships. Let's also talk about how Lannifer seems unable to have a conversation with another breathing human without it dripping in sexual tension. Same goes for Moghedien. And well, Leandrin has already shown some Sapphic tendencies too. As for our main Sapphic duo, even if the actual screen time together is sparse, we are still given a narrative where we see at every turn how vital they are to each other. We get to see Moiraine giving longing glances to the White Tower where Siuan is in episode 1 and later that day saving her life. They may be broken up after last season, but it doesn't change either their love for each other or the vital work they are doing together to save the world from the Dark One. Although that doesn't stop Moiraine and Lan talking about how Moiraine, given she's broken up with Siuan, should take the woman who keeps throwing glances their way to her bed. Ultimately, though, when she finds out what the possible future timelines hold for her and that she will likely die at Lannifer's hand via a slit throat or possibly while they're having some passionate sex in one potential timeline, I'm kind of down for that, can't lie. She visits Siuan's dream, a dangerous thing to do to bid her goodbye. It culminates in Moiraine telling her how much she loves her and how she'll wait for her in every lifetime until they can be together. We later see Siuan reading Moiraine's letters that she keeps locked in a box on her desk to show how much she thinks of her and misses her. So yes, I didn't expect one or both of them to survive, and look, Moiraine could very well end up dead as well by the end. It's been very plainly said in the show enough times that theirs is a doomed love that must take a back seat to the greater good of the world. We've been shown multiple times how both of them wish that they could live a peaceful life together, away from the politics and war, and in the same breath we're reminded that that will never be. So I can't say that we weren't forewarned, and like I said, it's not that Siuan was killed, it's more about how it was done and when. If you know the books, you'll know that Siuan dies, but she dies way later and in a way that is not so god-awful. In the books, after she is stilled, she continues to fight the Dark One, revealing a strength of character and a tenacity that is more important than the power she wields as the Amelin Seat or her ability to channel. Her death comes much later in the last battle in the 14th and final book. It's an honourable death. She is empowered and she gets to bring the work of over 20 years, ensuring the light wins against the dark, the work that she and Moiraine sacrificed their life and love for, to fruition. Instead, her legacy becomes one of failure and impotency. She did not adequately navigate the politics of the Tower to prepare the Aes Sedai to accept the Dragon Reborn, and she is robbed of being able to contribute as she did in the books after she is stilled. Her story ends with the betrayal of her sisters, being called a dark friend, stripped of her powers, and then, just to make the death particularly awful and graphic, she is beaten into a pulp, her bloodied body dragged across the floor to be then beheaded. It's done for the sensationalism, the shock. Despite her impassioned speech, there was no dignity to her death, and worse, it was done as a plot twist for the season that feels cheap and unnecessary. Ultimately, her life is not one of only tragedy and the sacrifice of what she wanted most in the world, to live a quiet life with Moiraine fishing on the river, but one of loneliness, isolation, with nothing in the end to show for it, except to leave a grieving partner who must now contend with having lost the love of her life. When looking at the impact that Siuan's presence has to the overall narrative, it amounts to very little because she was robbed of the real story that, according to the commentaries I've read, begins once Siuan is stilled in the books. So why did Siuan have to die? Why, when the books have more story left to tell? Well, according to Rafe Judkins, part of their relationship that is important and that we tried to set up in episode 5 is the idea that their relationship is bigger than this life. Their relationship is bigger than what happened in this moment. There's something really beautiful to that and something that only the Wheel of Time can do because it's inherent in the book series. Well, I can't personally see the beauty in any of this, Rafe, but please continue. We're adapting that these women won't all make it to the final battle, so it was important to us, especially with a history of lesbians being killed on screen, and knowing that we wanted to forefront this relationship from the beginning, to see that this relationship is about more than just this life to the two of them, and that relationship will continue regardless of them dying. I do think what's beautiful about them is that their relationship is about something more, and if it continues, it's not the final scene we intend to have between the two of them. I guess I can say that much. Okay, so he knows about how Saphics are killed off. He knows, and he did it like this at this point in the story. Now, it has been done well enough before. The Haunting of Bly Manor is an example where the response was largely positive to the tragic ending. I wasn't bothered by it in Dead Ringers. I personally wasn't a fan of how Agatha all along finished, but many were good with it, maybe because Agatha becomes a legit ghost and her story doesn't have to end here. I think of movies like A Perfect Ending that is widely enjoyed by Sapphic audiences, or The World to Come. I personally dislike those films for their endings, but I know many didn't mind. Now, he says it won't be the final scene between them, so maybe Siuan can come back in some way, maybe even in a more significant way, but my issue with her death doesn't hinge on whether she will come back or not. It's the sense of betrayal and the callous way in which she is killed off. And it must be also noted that Siuan is not just a Sapphic woman, but a black Sapphic woman, and that has its own intersectional implications. Sapphics of colour are already rarer and therefore all the more precious, and it's well known how violence is visited on BIPOC characters more frequently, both in film and TV and in real life. As a general note, for a show that is so wonderfully diverse, I have to say there seems to be a tendency to kill a lot of black characters. I was struck by it this season. Was it disproportionate? I didn't keep count, but it felt like it. The revelation of Moiraine and Siuan in Season 1, Episode 6 aside, I felt pretty tepid about the show overall, and perhaps the reason why is encapsulated by the quote from the celebrated science fiction writer Ursula K. Le Guin in her short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. The trouble is, we have a bad habit, encouraged by pedants and sophisticates, of considering happiness as something rather stupid. Only pain is intellectual, only evil interesting. This is the treason of the artist, a refusal to admit the banality of evil and the terrible boredom of pain. The Wheel of Time is already leaning into the dark, heavy, and hard edge of storytelling, which I do have a tendency to get bored with. So when added to the narrative that Moiraine and Siuan's love being doomed is somehow more beautiful and poignant than any potential happiness they could have, even if it's temporary, when added to Siuan's death rendered meaningless to the larger narrative far too soon in the story in a sensationalist way for shock value, all wrapped up in a show that I never really felt was hitting it on the head, I think I'm done. I'll just keep up to date via gift sets on Tumblr from now on. Until next time, lady lovers.